protest. Over 12,000 people have signed an Amnesty International petition calling for a judicial commission of inquiry and accountability for the deaths and injuries arising from the use of unlawful police force against protesters in Kenya. We have written to the Ministry of Interior, the Attorney General, the Inspector General of Police, and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority to offer them the right of reply concerning the findings and recommendations in this extended press release, but at the time of this press conference, we have not received any feedback from the agencies. The 25th of June is the most significant of the many protests that have been held nationwide between June and August. It was the first time that protesters in Kenya accessed the parliament, an area considered to be a critical infrastructure in response to the passing of the now rejected Finance Bill 2024. 6 human rights, legal and medical associations, including Amnesty International, the Law Society of Kenya, the Defenders Coalition, Article 19, Medics for Kenya, and the Independent Medical Legal Unit, released this extended press release based on interviews with 23 eyewitnesses, lawyers, and medical professionals. And we have also analyzed 45 videos and photographs amounting to 100 of those taken in Kenya, taken in Nairobi on the 25th of June. Documented between the 8th of July and the 9th of August, the evidence confirms that the Kenyan police unlawfully used lethal and non-lethal weapons. This includes the use of tear gas, water cannons, and batons. Police fired tear gas at protesters, bystanders, and medics, arbitrarily arrested and assaulted peaceful protesters, and fired live ammunition at crowds. They did this in violation of international human rights law and standards, including the UN Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by law enforcement officials, as well as the United Nations Human Rights Guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. The use of unnecessary and excessive force of protesters has led to the killing of at least 6 people that we have verified and the injury of hundreds. Let us be reminded that the right to protest in Kenya is protected under the Constitution. It is unacceptable that rather than facilitating and protecting protesters, police resorted to using deadly force.
On the 25th of June 2024, thousands of protesters gathered in Nairobi's Central Business District and other counties across the country to protest a finance bill that proposed an increase in taxes, including some regressive taxation measures amid high living costs. The bill was scheduled for a third reading in Parliament that afternoon. Apart from isolated incidences of some protesters throwing stones or tear gas canisters back at the police, the protest was largely peaceful. Video footage shows police firing tear gas at a small group of protesters in Nairobi at 10:30 a.m. This investigation confirmed that the police repeatedly shot tear gas canisters or grenades directly at protesters, sometimes at head level or straight up in the air, risking severely injuring people where they landed. Malik, a 28-year-old protester, told investigative researchers, "I felt a sharp pain on my hand, then saw a tear gas dropping in front of me. That's when I realized that the canister had hit me and my hand was bleeding. I have lost 3 fingers on my right hand. I will not be able to function the same." Doctors managing a medical camp that treated at least 300 people, including at least 4 police officers, said that injuries included lacerations, breathing issues related to the inhalation of tear gas, itching from chemical irritants in the water shot from, at times at high pressure, and serious injuries as a result of impact from a range of less lethal weapons. Tear gas should never be used against peaceful protesters, and isolated acts of violence do not justify the use of tear gas, since it has a wide area effect. Under no circumstance should it be fired directly at individuals. It should only be used in situations where there is generalized violence and after clear warnings are given, which evidence confirms that the police failed to issue. According to two witnesses and visible in videos, tear gas was fired into at least 2 medical camps and several times near the camps as injured persons were receiving treatment. A medic said they witnessed a tear gas grenade fall into a building at a 3rd medical camp used as a room to treat patients. Despite medics wearing identifiable clothing, a medical doctor was shot by a kinetic impact projectile in the chest while another was arrested and later released. Police were armed with lethal and less lethal weapons, which Amnesty International weapons experts identified to be, among others, G3, AK, and Galil pattern rifles, GZ Scorpion, Evo 3 submachine guns, various types of shotguns, loaded with kinetic impact projectiles and impact rounds. Photos and videos show the use of ill-adopted equipment, such as grenade launcher caps mounted on lethal ammunition-capable systems, G3 rifles, which appears to have caused panic among protesters. These launcher caps require blank rounds to function, and these can be easily confused as lethal rounds by protesters, as can be seen in several videos analyzed by our researchers. According to medics, they treated serious injuries likely caused by kinetic impact projectiles fired at close range.
By around 12:30 p.m., video shows that protesters had reached the Supreme Court 900 meters away from the Parliament buildings. The next 90 minutes was characterized by growing numbers of protesters and increased use of tear gas and water cannons by the police. Footage analyzed shows that officers appeared overwhelmed by the large number of protesters. The Parliament protest was announced several days in advance. Authorities had adequate time to facilitate the protest and minimize the potential for injury to any person and damage to property. Video shows that police neither formed a clear cordon around Parliament nor facilitated the protesters. Approximately 2:30 p.m., after amendments to the finance bill, videos show protesters advancing towards the building and what sounds like gunshots. Researchers were not able to determine if those shots came from the rifles equipped with tear gas grenade launchers, caps, or rifles firing live ammunition. Firearms with live ammunition are not an appropriate tool for the policing of assemblies. They must only be used when strictly avoidable to protect life. Videos show a police truck was set on fire next to Parliament entrance. At least 3 bodies are seen lying on the sidewalk opposite Parliament. Three protesters tend to the bodies, while 3 others try to carry an injured person towards the ambulances parked next to the police. One of them raised his hand, likely trying to indicate that they were unarmed. The police failed to provide medical assistance as required by the Principle 5C of the United Nations Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms by law enforcement officials. Instead, they fire tear gas canisters directly at the group, who flee, leaving the injured person lying on the ground. A tear gas grenade can be seen exploding next to the injured person. It is unclear if the explosion is due to defective equipment or if dangerous immediate release tear gas grenades, loaded with small quantities of explosives, had been used. As the smoke recedes, 2 protesters managed to carry one of the bodies towards the ambulance. It is unclear whether the person survived. At about 2:45 p.m., videos show police retreating, leaving unattended a section of the fence around the Parliament grounds that had fallen earlier. Protesters entered the area at around 2:56 p.m. Most of them had their hands up, likely to indicate they were unarmed. Men dressed in civilian clothes responded by firing shots. At least 4 men are seen on camera firing rifles and handguns towards the crowd and in the air. Researchers counted at least 45 shots fired within believed to have been shot dead. From evidence assessed, the protesters were unarmed. One gentleman, Jared, said this: "A man whose son was killed by a police bullet shot in the chin. It is so painful to lose your firstborn son. I sold land to educate him so that he could have a bright future, but all this has been in vain because he is now dead. The employer brought his first salary, and we have used that salary to purchase his coffin." 2 witnesses inside Parliament told researchers that protesters did not attack the members of Parliament, and some even helped them leave the building. Videos show a small number of protesters breaking windows and taking flags. Videos also show smoke coming from a section of Parliament, and a picture showed the burning area. It is not clear what caused the fire.
Our researchers could not establish a clear command structure responsible for policing the protests. Videos and photos taken throughout the day show that most officers, including those in identifiable police fatigues, were not identifiable by their service numbers as required under the Section 10 of the National Police Service Act. Most hid their faces and wore masks or balaclavas. Images also show groups of men in civilian clothes carrying weapons, working alongside the police, and riding in unmarked vehicles. International human rights standards require police to be uniformed and have identifying markers, including name tags or service numbers. According to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights organizations facilitated the release of over 300 persons illegally detained on the 25th of June alone. As of end of August, the Law Society of Kenya had documented 72 people that had been abducted, released, or were still missing in relation to the protests. 13 disappeared on the 25th of June, and a further 23 went missing within 7 days of this protest. Researchers have researched 3 cases of abductions which may amount to enforced disappearances. Kuria, a human rights defender, lost consciousness after accessing Parliament. He regained consciousness in a dark room guarded by 2 men. Kuria told researchers that the men interrogated him about how the protests were funded or facilitated before they drove him blindfolded and dumped him by the roadside in Nairobi. Kuria was held for over 24 hours. 2 other youth leaders testified that unidentified men snatched them off the street and forced them into vehicles while they were protesting before Parliament was breached. They were released more than a day later. Police actions violated Article 49 of the Constitution, which protects the rights of arrested persons. Kenyan authorities must conduct prompt, thorough, and independent investigations into all human rights violations committed in the context of the protests, including the killing of protesters, and hold those responsible fully accountable. Victims of unlawful police use of force and family members of those who have been killed must be compensated. We revisit the government's failure to stipulate guidelines and timeliness for the deployment of the Kenya Army to protect critical infrastructure in the aftermath of the June 25th protests. This failure violates international human rights standards and is subject to a court order by the High Court in Law Society of Kenya versus the Attorney General and 4 others. And this is petition E307 of 2024, KEHC 7702, KLR, Constitutional and Human Rights, 27 June 2024 ruling. We call upon the government to gazette the revocation of the deployment of the Kenya Army. We would like to thank you very much for being here, and we will now take questions. Thank you.
Perhaps we can take questions in groups of 4. So you can state your name and the question, and whether you like the response to be in Kiswahili or in English or in German. German we will politely decline. Over to you, Sarah.
What we'll do, those of us who want a Swahili summary, after this you can stay behind and you can do the summary. But for now, let's do the questions. Also, if you want, like you almost said, your response in Swahili, we can do that. Any questions? Please use this because of the people who are.
Hi, my name is Bana from Kamana TV. I have 2 questions. Number 1, from your statement, maybe I would like to know the figures of how many people died, whether during that day or during the entire Maandamano. Then in 2017, we had a similar issue of Maandamano, and I think 60 people or Kenyans were killed. I would like to know, now we are calling for compensation for those who have been named or killed during that Maandamano. Where are we concerning the 2017 case?
2017 or 2023?
2023. Thank you. Sorry, my name is Gatete Jorobe from Citizen TV. One question is about the petition that 12,000 people have already signed. What is the fate of that petition? Are you planning to take it to Parliament so that you can put pressure on MPs to make sure that a judicial commission of inquiry is formed, or what next after the collection of the signatures?
I think we can respond to those 2 first.
Maybe I can invite Maura Kabata, the Vice President of the Law Society of Kenya, to respond to the issue of delayed justice for the cases of 2023 and perhaps any of the other cases that we, the Law Society and us have been focused on. 1 second.
I will respond to the first question asked by the gentleman, but then I will also make a closing remark on our observations, especially on delayed justice for several public interest cases that the Law Society is handling. In particular, the petition E061 of 2021. These are the 2 young brothers who lost their lives in the hands of police officers, and the petition has not yet seen a day in terms of getting a hearing date. And on the several occasions since 2021, I would just want to put it into context, a factual context, that on the 9th of December 2022, this matter was supposed to come up for hearing, and it did not take off. On the 27th of February 2023, we noticed that the judge was on transfer. We then went back to the 27th of February where there was no activity on the same matter. On the 13th of June 2023, again the judge was in transfer, and the deputy registrar brought it down for directions. On the 13th of July 2023, the matter had not been listed and there were no directions. We went back to court on the 20th of March 2024. This was before Justice Monday, and the file had not been placed before the judge. And lastly, we were in court yesterday, where we received a notice that the duty judge was not sitting, and so we took directions for a mention on the 4th of December 2024. Our extreme concerns, and they focus around access to justice and effective resolution of disputes, especially such disputes that have a larger public diaphragm and concern, is that it is unacceptable in this day and age that 2 young Kenyans can die in the hands of those who are legally mandated to provide security for them, and 3 or 4 years later, we are seeing that this has not yet even gotten to a point where witnesses are actually testifying and we are having a closing to this. It defeats justice that 3 or 4 years later we can take lessons from our own colleague and advocate, Willie Kimani, whose trial took a long time, although we appreciate that it ended with the kind of justice that we had hoped for. But it should not be a tradition that such cases should take this long. It defeats the purpose of having a justice system. But just to respond to what the colleague from the media was asking, in fact, the Law Society of Kenya is collecting information together with our stakeholders and our partners in regards to mounting a consolidated petition towards reparations for all those who lost their lives and all those who lost or had an interest affected in one way or the other, especially in terms of a human rights regime. We realized quickly that, and this is more so strategic and tactical, so I'll not go into the details of it, but we realized that as we were
cases we call extrajudicial killings. 61. As IMLU, we have conducted autopsies on 49 of those bodies that tell us the actual cause of death, and these reports will be launched very soon. So, in regards to the persons that are still missing, the team here has reported 67 cases of enforced disappearances. 40 of those have been resolved. We still have 27 people missing. So those are some of the numbers that I would want to highlight and to just echo what we are saying, all of us here. In action on the recommendations that we have put forward, my colleague here, Irongo, will highlight the number of statements that we have made, the calls we have made to the different government agencies, calling for the implementation of our recommendations, but also for adherence to the Constitution of Kenya and to international instruments on human rights. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. So Irongo will respond to the question on the inquiry. The 67 we are talking about, I'd like to clarify that. You remember that in 2023, we had the protests around the high cost of living. So those are the numbers that we are reporting, and they are contained in the Death, Blood and Tears report that is accessible to anyone that wants to read that. Now, come to this year, 2024, hashtag reject finance bill. We are reporting the 61. And remember that there are various processes in regards to confirming and verifying. And we only issue numbers that we have verified. So there's a long process. And the autopsies are ongoing. I did mention that we've only carried out 49 autopsies. So the rest are ongoing. Your question around the causes of death, they vary. Death from blunt, being hit with a blunt object at the back of the head. We have shotgun wounds out of live ammunition, shots into various different parts of the body. So it's a combination of different things. And we will be sharing that report once it is ready. Thank you.
Allow me to speak to, excuse me, allow me to speak to two of the questions that have been raised. The first is, I think was raised by a citizen, which is on the, or is it Kameme, on the issue of what do we plan to do with the petitions. So 12,000 people have called for a judicial commission of inquiry. My understanding of that interest comes from probably three areas. The first is that millions of Kenyans and millions of people across the world who are friends of Kenya have watched the brutality and the violence on different channels, whether it be broadcast channels or whether it be narrowcast social media channels. And there is a real concern that nothing will be done to break the cycle that we saw in 2023 and also in 2017 going forward. The second is that the law enforcement agencies have an obligation and a responsibility and to change the pattern of policing, particularly with regards to Article 37 of our Constitution, which is essentially the right to assembly, and restore confidence that actually we are a rule of law nation committed crimes. In some cases, these are homicide crimes. These are crimes that have led to the loss of life. In other cases, they are crimes against the right to assemble and also the right to free expression. So we have to see accountability and, we would argue, as organizations, compensation for the families of the fallen and also those who have been injured unlawfully by police officers. So this would be the rationale for the petition. Practically, we are going to be presenting this to the National Assembly. We are also going to be engaging with the judiciary. And lastly, we will also, in good faith, reach out to the law enforcement agencies to give them the opportunity to essentially course correct the behavior that we have seen over the last 4 months. On the issue of, I think there was another issue that was raised on the, on the
Existence of torture chambers?
On the existence of torture chambers. Like many Kenyans and friends of Kenya across the world, we were horrified to hear that people who have been abducted have been held for respect under our laws and that they were in the presence of others. The Kitengela 3, we hope, will be a tipping point in terms of the practice of essentially abducting and disappearing Kenyan citizens for merely expressing themselves and merely expressing the right to protest and public assembly. We will continue to press on this issue, and I think we are concerned, I guess, not just with the holding facilities, the detention facilities that these unfortunate Kenyans have had to experience, but also I think we have to hold accountable the institutions, the units that are essentially operating with no regard to our laws and our rights and freedoms under our Constitution. So I think this would be the two things that we need to continue following up on. And we would make a call today for the government to release all persons that are within their custody or present them to a court of law as is required by the law immediately to avoid further deterioration of public confidence and the unlawfulness that we have seen in the case of the Kitengela 3. Can we take 2 or 3 more? Just maybe the last round?
Yeah, we could do one last round. Yeah, sure. Any more questions? Going once?
Eric Randolph from AFP. You've spoken about what you want to happen. What do you think will happen? And if you think you'll get a positive response from the authorities? And if not, what are the structural reasons that might prevent that happening? What are the
Okay. Maybe I can take that first question and then abductions.
No, assembly.
Okay.
So we are wrapping up after this, yeah?
Okay. So I guess over the 60 years of Amnesty International's experience, we have learned that one thing, that we are not our prophets. We are advocates. We continue to remain hopeful, and we continue to demand that there is behavior by institutions that are obligated under our laws anywhere in the world to essentially comply with the legal frameworks. It's impossible for us to predict what will happen. What we will say, however, is that there is a duty of care, there is a duty of responsibility that the Kenyan government, like all governments in the world, have to protect their citizens, to uphold human rights, and thirdly, to seek and ensure that those whose rights are violated, that that's the position we are taking. We will hold that position, and it is up for the state to decide how it wants to respond. But we obviously would want to see a positive, lawful, and I guess human rights-based response to the issues that we have documented in this press release and in the other reports that we have done with regards to 2023 and 2024. I think we're going to have Article 19 respond to the Assembly's bill. So if I can just ask hop, skip, and jump.
So, Abu Bakar, thank you again. So, as I make reference to the Assemblies and Demonstration Bill that was brought up in May, before even the protest came up, May 2024, we have to recognize that this situation of protest, the bill that is suggested, and also in reference to the Public Order Act, it will affect all kinds of demonstrations, not just political-related demonstrations. Think of the situations where people have gone to the streets when something happens in their learning institutions, whether at the lowest level or at the tertiary institutions. So it is our bill. As the civil society, we have submitted memorandum. The timeline was on 9th of September, and we hope as many of participation. We do not support the terms and the provisions in that bill, as it does not reflect the situation we are in as a country. In particular, the definition of terms has not been made more clear. They still have general terms that are very counterproductive in the state that we are in, whether you're looking at public order, public national security. They have not been clearly defined. We also have issues with the exorbitant qualifications and requirements of organizers when they are being told to manage individuals in the protest before, during, and after. That is a situation that is solely in the mandate of the police. How they support protests as required by law is very clear. So that cannot be passed on to organizers or even marshals during the protest. Lastly, it limits on the freedom of expression. There are specific provisions in that bill that state on how you should dress, where or how not to cover your face during the protest. And the basic reasons for protest is to be loud and to be visible, to bring public attention to a situation on the ground. So when you limit such avenues of expression, it not only limits what can be done in the protest, but it also brings in the fear to the civilians or to the citizens, what becomes of my identity being very clear to the law enforcement or to even the adversary of the issue you are dealing with. So as a fraternity, we hope that it will not progress further, and if it does, there will be better adjustments that will reflect the situation we have on the ground and promotes the constitutional right to protest, to demonstrate, to picket in Kenya.
In regards to the numbers, the question around the numbers, we did mention that we still have 27 people that are missing, and yesterday you remember that there were efforts to somewhat have the names of the missing persons. And so we are calling for the immediate release of these 27, wherever they are being held. And just to, in summary, to respond to the last question around what we expect the state to do, this is a good opportunity for the new Inspector General of Police to put in motion respect for human rights, to respect, to uphold, and to safeguard the Constitution of Kenya, and specifically Article 37. We have seen the right to picketing, the right to assembly, the right to voice being curtailed, and we have seen people being disappeared as a result of that. So our collective voice is that this would be a good opportunity for the new Inspector General of Police to ensure that policing in Kenya meets the standards that are required. Thank you.
In fact, what is of great interest right now is there is a Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2024 number 2, which is contained in Kenya Gazette Supplement number 168, Senate Bills number 46. There is a likelihood that the events that happened on the June of 25th, 2024 will culminate in a lot of political movements, especially legislative political movements. And so, even though we are ready and we are prepared to give our joint memoranda into this constitutional amendment move, we do realize that the knee-jerk reaction from Parliament being a victim of the successful protests that found their ways to Parliament challenging the Finance Bill 2024, is that a lot of the amendments contained in that particular extremely involved at this particular time, because 14 years ago or so, and in August 28th, we marked the 40th reactions from a majority of Kenyans who peacefully engaged in protests to challenge what they would have received at that time as an excessive overhaul of taxation within the Finance Act 2024. Many of those amendments contained in that particular proposed amendment do not and should not find favor within your lives, because even though the Constitution outlines, and we correctly put it, that even when we went to court, and I am tempted to break my promise that I will not comment about this case, even though we went to court to challenge the Gazette notices that seemed to deploy the military, there is an urgent need to keep on resolving these legal issues by amending our laws. I find as though our laws are completely capable of addressing our main concerns with a little bit of polish here and there, but these incessant intentions to always amend the Constitution just because something happened is something that we are appealing to Kenyans to be vigilant. In fact, at a time like this, edition of Kenya, it mentions the word emergency about 23 or 24 times, but it mentions state of emergency about 4 times. So there should not be a hula baloo about an emergency and state of emergency. An emergency is, I mean, even when a mother is going into labor, that's an emergency. An emergency is when you want to go for a call of nature, is an emergency. An emergency is when you have hunger pangs. I mean, we should not conflate legal issues to suit political comfort of a few selected political class, companions. Let us be extremely vigilant. This is a call that I am making to these amendments, because we may find ourselves in these circles into the concern that was raised by a colleague here about the demonstrations bill. Because if it doesn't pass through that, it passes through a constitutional amendment, then we find ourselves in a very uncomfortable place. But I know there are well-wishing Kenyans. There are those Kenyans that, as we are here today, who will keep on informing, exposing, and making commentaries, including finding, resolving judicial processes to try and address these concerns. I wanted to make this particularly because it's something that we are making our memorandum on. You know, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Let me not be carried away.
So thank you, colleagues, for turning up in large numbers. I know we've said so many numbers, so there's a likelihood of us confusing them. So myself and Matthias from Amnesty Kenya will be available throughout the day if you need to clarify on the numbers. Our senior colleagues will also be here throughout the day in case you need to do one-on-one interviews on anything, if you want to do features, they're available. We also have a cup of tea right outside. If any of us would like to catch a break. Asanteni sana, have a blessed afternoon.
Yeah.
Must be on the flight back.